The medical bay smelled wrong. Dr. Sarah Chun had worked aboard enough vessels to know when something didn't match protocol, and the faint metallic scent mixing with standard antiseptic made her pause mid-step. Her newest patient lay on the examination table, scales glinting under the overhead lights like broken glass scattered across midnight water. "You're certain about this?" Sarah asked, not looking up from her scanner. The readings made no sense. The creature before her registered temperatures that should have turned blood to steam, yet here it was, breathing steadily, watching her with eyes that held an intelligence she couldn't quite define. Ambassador Kelthris of the Draconian Confederacy shifted slightly, wincing. The human medic was recommended specifically. Our own physicians refused treatment. That explained the diplomatic shuttle that had docked 3 hours ago without warning. Sarah had assumed another headache about trade routes or mineral rights. Instead, they'd wheeled in something that looked like it had crawled from humanity's oldest nightmares and asked her to heal it. "Your people breathe plasma," Sarah said, finally meeting those amber eyes. "Your blood chemistry would corrode through my scalpels. Your immune system treats most medicines like invading armies. And you came to me because humans are insane enough to try anyway." Sarah almost smiled. Almost. She'd heard variations of that sentiment for 5 years now, ever since humanity had stumbled into the galactic community with all the grace of a drunk uncle at a wedding. The other species found human behavior baffling. Humans kept pets. Humans formed emotional bonds with machines. Humans wept over fictional stories and laughed at their own mortality. Humans also didn't know when to quit. "The shrapnel is embedded near your primary heart," Sarah said, highlighting the scan. "Removing it requires precision your people's tools can't achieve at that temperature. One wrong move and you hemorrhage. I am aware. You could die on this table. I am also aware of that." Sarah set down her scanner and really looked at the ambassador. The scales along Kelthris's left flank had dulled, losing the iridescent quality that made draconians so striking. Pain creased the corners of those eyes, carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone who'd spent years reading faces across species barriers. "Why not let it kill you slowly?" Sarah asked. "Your people value honorable deaths. Falling in battle carries weight. Dying on examination table in a human medical bay does not." Kelthris made a sound somewhere between a hiss and a sigh. "The Confederacy negotiates a treaty with the Klarn Collective next month. If I die, my replacement will be Ambassador Vrethis. And Vrethis believes humans are barely civilized animals who got lucky with primitive faster-than-light travel. He will sabotage any alliance between our people and yours." Sarah picked up her tools, already running calculations. The surgery would require temperature-controlled fields she'd need to improvise. Her instruments would need constant cooling. She'd have to work faster than she'd ever worked before, because Kelthris's metabolism would fight her every step of the way. "You came here to make a political point," Sarah said. "I came here because I believe humans possess something my people lost millennia ago." Kelthris settled back against the table, accepting whatever came next. "You see broken things, and your first instinct is to fix them. Not because of profit, not because of obligation, simply because they are broken and you are not." Sarah initialized the temperature controls and began sterilizing her workspace. "We're also stubborn and don't listen when people tell us something is impossible. I am counting on it." The surgery took 4 hours. Sarah's hands cramped twice. She burned through 3 sets of instruments when the cooling systems couldn't compensate fast enough. Twice, Kelthris's vitals dropped into ranges that should have meant death, and twice Sarah had pulled the ambassador back through a combination of human stubbornness and techniques no draconian physician would have attempted. When she finally extracted the last fragment of shrapnel, a piece of twisted metal the size of her thumb that glowed dull red, even in the open air, Sarah felt her hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. "Your heart rate is elevated," Kelthris observed weakly. "Because I just performed surgery on someone whose blood could melt my face," Sarah replied, sealing the wound with specialized adhesives she'd formulated on the spot. "Give me a minute to remember how to breathe normally. You saved my life. I did my job. No. Kelthris raised one clawed hand, the movement slow but deliberate. You risked your life for someone you'd never met, from a species that still frightens human children in their bedtime stories. That is not a job. That is who you are. Sarah cleaned her instruments in silence, unsure how to respond. Finally, she said, the Confederacy really needs that treaty. The galaxy needs that treaty. The Klarn grow bolder. Without unity among the other species, they will expand until resistance becomes impossible. Then rest, Sarah said. You have a month to heal before those negotiations. Kelthris's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. And perhaps, when the other ambassadors ask how I survived, I will tell them about the human who held fire in her hands to save a dragon's life. Kelthris returned to consciousness slowly, awareness filtering through layers of healing-induced fog. The medical bay had dimmed its lights, accommodating draconian sensitivity during recovery. Sarah sat at her desk across the room, reviewing scan results while nursing a container of what draconians had learned was called coffee. You should rest, Kelthris said, voice rough from the anesthesia. How long? 6 hours since surgery. Your vitals have stabilized beyond anything I'd hoped for. Sarah approached the table, scanner in hand. Your regeneration is remarkable. The tissue around the surgical site has already begun knitting itself together. And yet you remain awake. Sarah shrugged. Someone needs to monitor you. Your physiology doesn't exactly come with a standard medical database entry. There are other human medics aboard this station. There are. Sarah checked the temperature controls, made a minute adjustment. But they didn't perform the surgery. They don't know what I know about your specific readings, your responses to treatment. Handing you off to someone else now would be inefficient. Kelthris studied the human carefully. 5 years of diplomatic training had taught the ambassador to read other species' body language, and Sarah's exhaustion was evident in the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she worked. Yet she remained, monitoring, adjusting, ensuring her patient's safety. This is not protocol, Kelthris observed. I have reviewed human medical procedures. Post-operative care typically involves scheduled monitoring, not continuous observation. You're not a typical patient. No, I am a representative of a species that could reduce this station to molten slag if diplomatic relations soured. Kelthris's tone remained gentle despite the harsh words. Yet you treat me as you would any other being in need of care. Sarah met those amber eyes directly. Should I not? Most species would not. The Klarn would have let me die and considered it natural selection. The Vryn would have attempted treatment, but maintained maximum distance, viewing close contact as contamination risk. The Rothani would have helped, but only after calculating the precise political advantage of my survival. And humans see someone hurt and forget to be afraid. Kelthris shifted carefully, testing the limits of movement. The pain had diminished to manageable levels, another surprise. Your species has been the galactic community for barely a standard cycle, yet you have already established yourselves as mediators, peacekeepers, and apparently, surgeons willing to perform impossible procedures. Sarah returned to her desk, but Kelthris noticed she angled her chair to maintain visual contact with the examination table. We're new here. Maybe we just don't know any better yet. Or perhaps you know something the rest of us forgot. Kelthris paused, considering how much to reveal. Diplomatic training ward with an unfamiliar impulse toward honesty. My people once cared for other species. Archaeological evidence suggests the early Draconians maintained relationships with dozens of smaller civilizations, offering protection and resources without demanding subjugation. What happened? We grew powerful. Strength became our identity. Compassion became viewed as weakness, a relic of our primitive past. Within 1,000 years, we had isolated ourselves, convinced that true supremacy meant standing alone. Kelthris's voice carried old regret. Now we are mighty and alone, while species like yours form connections across the galaxy. Sarah absorbed this quietly. Is that why you really came here? Not just for the surgery, but to understand something? Perhaps. Kelthris admitted. The Confederacy leadership debates humanity's role in galactic affairs. Some, like Vrethis, see you as threats to the established order. Others recognize that your approach to diplomacy, your willingness to risk yourself for strangers, represents something we desperately need. And I came here to have shrapnel removed. But I'm beginning to think I came to remember what my people were before we decided strength meant solitude. Kelfers paused. Your hands still shake. Sarah glanced down, surprised. Adrenaline. It takes time to fade. You performed surgery for 4 hours on a patient whose physiology could have killed you with an errant movement. You succeeded despite impossible odds. Yet now you continue working, monitoring my recovery, ensuring the job is truly finished. Kelfers's tone held something between wonder and sadness. This is what terrifies the other species about humanity. Not your weapons, or your ships, or your expansion. It is this inexplicable drive to care beyond all reason. Maybe we're just stubborn. No, stubborn is refusing to acknowledge defeat. This is something else entirely. Kelfers settled back, feeling the medication Sarah had administered begin its work. This is hope. Sarah smiled faintly. Get some rest, Ambassador. We'll continue this philosophical discussion when you're not recovering from major surgery. As Kelfris drifted toward healing sleep, the ambassador's last conscious thought was that perhaps the treaty negotiations would prove easier than anticipated. After all, how could Vrethis argue against an alliance with a species that held fire in their hands to save a dragon's life? The medical bay's lights continued their gentle dimming cycle. Sarah remained at her desk, monitoring, adjusting, ensuring her patient's safety. Outside, the station rotated through its artificial night, and across the galaxy, species watched and wondered what humanity would do next. They would not have long to wait. Ambassador Vrethis arrived precisely 12 hours after Kelfers's surgery, flanked by 2 draconian guards whose scales gleamed with military polish. Sarah looked up from her medical logs as the bay doors hissed open, immediately noting the visitor's aggressive posture and the disdain in eyes that swept across the human medical facility like a lord surveying a peasant's hovel. I am here for Ambassador Kelferis, Vrethis announced, ignoring Sarah entirely and addressing the room itself. Prepare the ambassador for transport to proper medical facilities. Ambassador Kelferis is recovering from major surgery, Sarah replied evenly, not rising from her chair. Transport at this stage would risk complications. Now Vrethis looked at her, really looked, and Sarah felt the weight of that alien gaze. She'd been warned that some draconians could project an almost physical sense of threat, an evolutionary holdover from their predatory ancestry. Vrethis wielded it like a weapon. You are the human who performed this alleged procedure. I am Dr. Sarah Chun, yes. Then you will note in your records that I am removing the ambassador against medical advice. Vrethis gestured to the guards. Kelferis should never have sought treatment from a species that still struggles with basic genetic engineering. Stop. Kelferis's voice cut across the medical bay, weak but commanding. The ambassador had awakened during the exchange, scales dimmed from fatigue, but eyes sharp. I gave no authorization for removal. Vrethis's expression twisted into something approaching concern, though Sarah suspected it was more about political inconvenience than genuine care. The Confederacy Council sent me personally when they learned of your location. You endangered yourself and our diplomatic standing by submitting to primitive medical care. I submitted to the only physician in 3 sectors willing to attempt the procedure. Kelferis tried to sit up, winced, and Sarah immediately moved to the examination table with her scanner. Don't move, Sarah instructed, checking the surgical site. The tissue bonding is still in early stages. Vrethis hissed, a sound of pure contempt. You see, already complications arise. Human medicine is insufficient for draconian physiology. The complications would be significantly worse if I'd let the shrapnel remain embedded near the ambassador's primary heart, Sarah said, not looking up from her scanner. Which, I note, your proper medical facilities refuse to address. Because the risk was too great. And yet here Kelferis is alive and healing. Sarah finally met Vrethus's gaze, and something in her expression made the larger ambassador pause. The surgery was successful. The patient is stable. All indicators suggest full recovery within 2 weeks. Impossible. Draconian tissue takes months to fully regenerate after such trauma. Then perhaps you should review my procedure logs. Sarah pulled up the holographic display, showing the surgery in detailed 3-dimensional reconstruction. I used a combination of temperature-controlled fields and specialized adhesives that work with draconian regenerative properties rather than against them. Your physicians focused on preventing damage. I focused on facilitating natural healing. Vrethus studied the display, eyes narrowing. These techniques are not in any medical database. No, I developed them on the spot, based on real-time observations during surgery. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Humans are good at improvising. Reckless endangerment disguised as innovation. Calculated risk based on detailed analysis and extensive medical knowledge. Sarah's voice remained calm, but steel crept into her tone. I understand the Confederacy values strength and certainty. But sometimes healing requires accepting vulnerability and trusting others to help. The medical bay fell silent except for the soft hum of monitoring equipment. Kelfris watched the exchange with interest, recognizing the clash of philosophies playing out before them. Vrethus represented traditional draconian values, self-sufficiency, distrust of outsiders, strength through isolation. Sarah embodied something different, cooperation, shared risk, strength through connection. You speak of trust, Vrethus said finally. Yet your species has been part of the galactic community for less time than I have held diplomatic rank. What trust have you earned? The trust of my patient, Sarah replied simply. Ambassador Kelfris came here knowing the risks, chose to accept those risks, and now heals because we both trusted each other to do our parts. Vrethus turned to Kelfris. This is foolishness. The council will demand explanations. Then I will provide them. Kelfris's voice grew stronger. I will tell them that human medicine accomplished what draconian physicians deemed impossible. I will tell them that Dr. Chun risked her own safety to save a member of a species that terrifies human children. And I will tell them that if the Confederacy wishes to remain relevant in changing galactic politics, we must learn from species like humanity rather than dismissing them. You risk your career with such statements. I risk far more by staying silent. Kelfris met Sarah's eyes. The Klarn expand. The old alliances fracture. The galaxy needs species willing to help each other, not stand apart in prideful isolation. Vrethus's scales rippled, a visible sign of agitation. And if the council disagrees? If they view this entire incident as proof that humans are dangerously unpredictable, then the council will have learned nothing from 3,000 years of history. Kelfris settled back against the examination table, exhaustion evident but determination unwavering. Dr. Chun, how long until I can safely travel? 2 days, minimum, Sarah said. Possibly 3 if we want to ensure 0 complications. I will remain here until Dr. Chun clears me for transport, Kelfris told Vrethus. You may report this to the council along with the surgery results. Perhaps they will learn something from the data. Vrethus studied them both for a long moment. Finally, the ambassador gestured to the guards. I will return in 3 days. The council expects a full report, including detailed explanations of these unorthodox procedures. As the doors closed behind Vrethus and the guards, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That could have gone better. On the contrary, Kelfris said, Vrethus did not forcibly remove me, did not threaten sanctions against the station, did not even insist on draconian guards remaining in the medical bay. These are significant concessions from someone who entered expecting complete capitulation. Because you stood up to him. Because we both did. Kelfris's expression warmed slightly. You faced down a draconian ambassador without flinching. Most species would have immediately deferred to perceived authority. Most species probably have more sense than humans, Sarah admitted. Perhaps. Or perhaps humans simply refuse to accept that some challenges are insurmountable. Kelfris paused. The next few weeks will be difficult. Vrethis will work to undermine the treaty negotiations. The Council will scrutinize every aspect of my treatment and recovery. Political forces will attempt to use this incident to justify isolation. Then we'd better make sure your recovery is absolutely perfect, Sarah said. Give them nothing to criticize except their own prejudices. The station's commercial district hummed with activity as Sarah made her way through crowds representing dozens of species. She'd left Kelthris resting under the care of Dr. Martinez, one of her colleagues who'd agreed to monitor the ambassador's vitals for a few hours. Sarah needed supplies that the medical bay's standard inventory didn't include, components for the specialized monitoring equipment she'd jury-rigged during surgery. Dr. Chun, a familiar voice called from a small shop entrance. Sarah turned to find Merchant Quilix, a Rothani trader whose establishment she'd patronized before. The Rothani resembled nothing so much as an upright mantis dressed in merchant's robes, compound eyes glittering with mercantile interest. I heard remarkable news. You performed surgery on a draconian ambassador. Word traveled fast on the station. Sarah shouldn't have been surprised. Just doing my job, Quilix. Just doing your job, she says. Quilix's mandibles clicked with amusement. The Rothani Medical Consortium has been attempting to establish treatment protocols for high-temperature species for 2 decades. You accomplish it in a single afternoon using improvised equipment. Necessity breeds innovation, Sarah said, trying to move past. She had a list of components to acquire in limited time. Wait, please. Quilix's tone shifted, becoming more serious. I may have information relevant to your patient's situation. Information that comes with no price, merely offered in respect for your achievement. That stopped Sarah. Rothani never offered anything without price. Their species had elevated trade to a form of art, conducting business with mathematical precision and unwavering pursuit of profit. Free information suggested something unusual was happening. I'm listening. Quilix gestured toward the shop's interior. Better discussed in private. The shop's back room was cluttered with components Sarah couldn't identify, technology from species she'd never encountered. Quilix settled onto a specialized perch and regarded her with those multifaceted eyes. Ambassador Vrethis visited the Rothani commercial delegation this morning. Quilix began. He sought information about human medical capabilities, particularly any incidents of malpractice or failed procedures. Looking for ammunition against me. Precisely. He was disappointed to learn that human medical personnel on this station maintain an exceptional success rate, and that you specifically have never lost a patient under your care. Quilix paused. He then inquired about purchasing information regarding human biological weaknesses, specific vulnerabilities that might be exploited. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Did you sell it to him? I did not, nor did any reputable Rothani merchant. Quilix's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned to recognize as disapproval. We Rothani value profit, yes, but we also value stability. Vrethis seeks to destabilize growing human draconian cooperation because it threatens his political position. That instability would be bad for business across multiple sectors. So you're helping me because it's profitable. I am helping you because sometimes the most profitable long-term strategy is supporting those who build rather than those who destroy. Quilix produced a small data chip. This contains communication logs between Vrethis and several anti-human factions within the Confederacy. Nothing directly threatening, but enough to establish a pattern of interference. Sarah took the chip carefully. Why give this to me instead of Kelthris? Because Kelthris is draconian. Internal politics within the Confederacy operate by different rules than external diplomacy. If you present this information, it becomes evidence of human competence in intelligence gathering. If Kelthris presents it, it becomes ammunition in a factional power struggle. Quilix's eyes gleamed. Besides, I suspect you will know precisely when to use it for maximum effect. You're betting on the human doctor outmaneuvering a draconian ambassador. I am betting on the human doctor who held fire in her hands to save a patient's life, also possessing the courage to fight for what she believes is right. Quilek stood, mandibles clicking in what might have been approval. The galaxy is changing, Dr. Chun. Species that adapt will thrive. Those that cling to old certainties will find themselves increasingly irrelevant. Sarah pocketed the data chip and pulled out her supply list. I still need these components. How much? For you? Standard station pricing, minus a 10% discount for a valued customer. Quilex's tone returned to merchant normalcy. Business is still business, after all. 20 minutes later, Sarah returned to the medical bay with her supplies and considerably lighter pockets. Kelthris was awake, speaking quietly with Dr. Martinez about draconian physiology. Both looked up as Sarah entered. Your colleague has been educating me on human medical training, Kelthris said. Apparently, you spend more years in study than most species dedicate to their entire careers. We like to be thorough, Sarah replied, setting down her supplies and pulling Martinez aside. Everything's stable. Vitals are actually improving beyond projected rates. Whatever you did during surgery, it worked remarkably well. Martinez lowered her voice. Vrethis contacted station administration. He's filing formal complaints about unauthorized medical procedures on a diplomatic representative. Of course he is. Sarah, this could affect your license. Station medical protocols do require consent for experimental procedures, and technically what you did, I got consent. Verbal, recorded in the medical logs. Sarah kept her voice calm. Kelthris specifically requested that I attempt the surgery despite the risks. A draconian ambassador's verbal consent may not hold up against Confederacy legal challenges. Then we'll deal with those challenges when they come. Sarah glanced at Kelthris, who was politely pretending not to hear the conversation. Right now, I have a patient who needs monitoring and specialized care. Everything else is secondary. Martinez sighed. You know I support you. Just be careful. Vrethis has powerful allies, and from what I've heard, he's very good at turning situations to his advantage. After Martinez left, Sarah approached Kelthris with her scanner. More complications from our friend Vrethis. I overheard. My apologies for bringing this difficulty upon you. You didn't bring anything. Vrethis is making his own choices. Sarah reviewed the scan results, pleased with the continued improvement. How's the pain level? Minimal. Your medications are remarkably effective. Kelthris shifted carefully. Dr. Chun, there is something you should understand about draconian politics. Vrethis does not merely oppose human integration into galactic affairs. He represents a faction that believes the Confederacy's declining influence stems from insufficient aggression. They advocate for expansion through force, not diplomacy. And if you die from complications, they gain ammunition for their position. Precisely. My survival proves humans can be valuable allies. My death would be used to justify isolation and militarization. Kelthris met her eyes. This is why Vrethis searches so desperately for any flaw in your treatment. He needs me to fail. Sarah thought about the data chip in her pocket, the evidence of Vrethis's interference. Not yet, she decided. That card was best played when it would have maximum impact. Then we won't fail, Sarah said simply. Your recovery continues ahead of schedule. In 3 days, you'll be healthy enough to travel, and Vrethis will have nothing to criticize except his own prejudices. The 3rd day arrived with calculated precision. Kelthris moved without pain, scales regaining their iridescent shimmer, vitals reading better than before the injury. Sarah had documented everything meticulously, knowing her work would face intense scrutiny. Vrethis arrived early, accompanied this time by a draconian physician named Thexus whose scales bore the deep crimson of medical specialists. Sarah recognized the play immediately, bring an expert to find flaws in the human doctor's work. Dr. Chun, Vrethis said without preamble. This is Dr. Thexus, one of the Confederacy's leading surgical specialists. I trust you will grant full access to all medical records and permit thorough examination of the patient. Of course, Sarah replied. All records are available through the standard medical database. Ambassador Kelthris has already consented to examination. Phexus approached Kelthris with scanner in hand, moving with professional efficiency. Sarah watched, noting how the draconian physician's eyes widened slightly as the first readings appeared. Phexus ran the scanner again, adjusted settings, ran it a third time. These readings cannot be accurate, Phexus said finally. The tissue regeneration is occurring at a rate 3 times normal for draconian physiology. The surgical site shows complete integration, 0 signs of rejection or inflammation. This suggests either equipment malfunction or what? Vrethis pressed, or techniques beyond current Confederacy medical understanding. Phexus looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. Dr. Chun, may I review your surgical logs? Sarah pulled up the holographic display, showing the 4-hour procedure in complete detail. Phexus watched in silence, occasionally pausing to examine specific moments more closely. The other Draconian's expression shifted from skepticism to fascination to something that might have been professional envy. Remarkable, Phexus said quietly. You utilize the temperature differentials to actually accelerate healing rather than simply preventing damage. The adhesive compounds you formulated created a temporary matrix that guided natural regeneration along optimal pathways. I have never seen anything like this. Your physicians could replicate the technique, Sarah offered. I'm happy to share all research and procedural notes. Phexus blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You would share proprietary medical advances freely? Medicine isn't about proprietary advantages. It's about healing people. Sarah pulled up additional data. I've already prepared a complete technical breakdown, including the specialized equipment I developed during surgery. If it helps other physicians treat high-temperature species, everyone benefits. Vrethis stepped forward, scales rippling with agitation. This proves nothing. Accelerated healing could indicate complications yet to emerge. Long-term effects remain unknown. Long-term effects of leaving shrapnel embedded near a primary heart are quite well documented, Phexus said, tone dry. They typically involve death within months. Dr. Chin's intervention has given Ambassador Kelthris decades of continued life. You cannot possibly guarantee. With respect, Ambassador Vrethis, I can. Phexus straightened, scales reflecting the medical bay's lights. I have practiced draconian medicine for 40 years. I have seen thousands of cases similar to Ambassador Kelthris's injury. Not one patient survived more than half a year. Dr. Chin accomplished what our entire medical establishment deemed impossible. Vrethis's expression darkened. And we are simply to accept human superiority in this field. We are to accept that different species approach problems differently, and that sometimes those different approaches yield superior results. Phexus turned to Sarah. Dr. Chun, the Confederacy Medical Consortium would very much like to establish collaborative research agreements with human medical institutions. Would your people be amenable? Sarah felt the shift in the room's dynamics. This was what Vrethis had feared, what Kelthris had hoped for. Concrete evidence that cooperation between species produced better outcomes than isolation. I can't speak for all human medical institutions, Sarah said carefully. But I'm certainly willing to facilitate introductions and share what I've learned. Unacceptable. Vrethis's voice rose. The Confederacy Council has not authorized such collaboration. Dr. Phexus, you exceed your authority. I exceed nothing. The medical consortium operates independently of political oversight by council decree established 2 centuries ago. Phexus's tone remained professionally neutral, but Sarah detected an undercurrent of satisfaction. Medical advancement serves all Draconians, regardless of factional politics. Vrethis turned to Kelthris. You orchestrated this, brought human medicine into Confederacy affairs to undermine traditional authority. I sought medical treatment for a life-threatening injury, Kelthris replied calmly. That Dr. Chin's success has broader implications for interspecies cooperation is simply a fortunate outcome. There is nothing fortunate about undermining Confederacy sovereignty. There is everything fortunate about not dying. Kelthris stood, moving with ease that would have been impossible 3 days earlier. Dr. Chun saved my life using techniques our own physicians could not or would not attempt. That is objective fact, not political maneuvering. Sarah decided this was the moment. She pulled out the data chip Quilix had provided and held it up. Ambassador Vrethus, I've been holding on to something that might interest you. Vrethus's eyes fixed on the chip with unmistakable wariness. What is that? Communication logs. Specifically, your communications with anti-human factions within the Confederacy, your attempts to purchase information about human biological weaknesses, and your inquiries about manufacturing evidence of medical malpractice. Sarah's voice remained pleasant, conversational. I wasn't sure when to mention this, but since we're discussing political maneuvering, the silence that followed was absolute. Thexus looked between Sarah and Vrethus with dawning understanding. Kelthrus's expression showed no surprise, suggesting the ambassador had suspected something similar. That information was obtained illegally, Vrethus said finally. Actually, it was obtained through legal commercial channels. The Rothani keep excellent records, and they value stability over political chaos. Sarah set the chip down on her desk. I have no intention of making this public. It's simply insurance against further interference in medical operations or attempts to discredit legitimate treatment protocols. Vrethus stared at her, and Sarah met that alien gaze without flinching. She'd held fire in her hands to save a life. Facing down political opposition seemed almost trivial in comparison. You dare threaten a Confederacy ambassador. I dare protect my patient and maintain the integrity of medical care on this station. Sarah's tone hardened slightly. If that requires holding evidence of political interference, so be it. The treaty negotiations began 3 weeks later in one of the station's grandest conference chambers. Representatives from a dozen species gathered to discuss unified response to Klarn expansion, and Ambassador Kelthrus represented the Draconian Confederacy with full authority. Sarah watched the proceedings from an observation gallery, present at Kelthrus's specific invitation. The ambassador moved with complete confidence, scales gleaming with health, showing no signs of the injury that had brought them together. Ambassador Vrethus sat in a junior position among the Draconian delegation, relegated there by council action after the Medical Consortium's report praised human-Draconian medical cooperation. The data chip Sarah had provided to Kelthrus privately had circulated among council members, revealing Vrethus's attempts to sabotage diplomatic efforts. Political consequences had followed swiftly. Impressive turnout, Dr. Martinez said, settling into the seat beside Sarah. I heard even the Vryn sent representatives. They never participate in multi-species negotiations. Kelthrus has been working the diplomatic channels hard, Sarah replied. Apparently, there's significant interest in cooperation now that the medical breakthrough has demonstrated concrete benefits of interspecies collaboration. Below, Kelthrus stood to address the assembly. The ambassador's voice carried clearly through the chamber's audio system, translated in real time for species whose auditory ranges differed. Representatives, honored colleagues, I come before you today with a simple message. Cooperation is not weakness. 3 weeks ago, I faced death from an injury our own physicians deemed untreatable. I could have accepted this fate with traditional draconian pride, dying alone rather than seeking help outside my species. Instead, I trusted a human doctor who held fire in her hands to save my life. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Kelthrus continued, undeterred. Dr. Sarah Chun represents what humanity brings to our galactic community. The audacity to attempt the impossible, the compassion to risk themselves for others, and the wisdom to share their knowledge freely. Because of her techniques, draconian medical science has advanced decades in mere weeks. Other species have begun requesting collaborative research agreements. We all benefit when we choose cooperation over isolation. Kelthrus gestured toward the observation gallery, toward where Sarah sat. The Klarn grow stronger because they enforce unity through conquest. We can only counter them by choosing unity through cooperation, by recognizing that each species brings unique strengths to share challenges, by accepting help when needed and offering help when able. The assembly fell silent, representatives considering these words. Then the Rothani delegation's leader stood, mandibles clicking approval. The Rothani Commercial Consortium supports this position. We have observed human integration into galactic trade over these past years. Their approach prioritizes long-term relationships over short-term advantage. This makes them valuable partners and necessary allies against clone expansion. One by one, other delegations voice support. The Vrin, the Kalash, even the notoriously isolationist BRYNTH indicated willingness to discuss cooperation frameworks. Sarah watched in amazement as Kelthris orchestrated consensus that 3 months ago would have seemed impossible. Vrethis sat silent throughout, scales dull with political defeat. After the session concluded, Kelthris made their way to the observation gallery. Sarah stood as the ambassador approached. "That was remarkable," Sarah said. "I've never seen you work a room like that. I learned from an expert in overcoming impossible odds." Kelthris's eyes held warmth. "The treaty framework is established. Details will require months of negotiation, but the foundation is solid. All because you were willing to take a risk 3 weeks ago." "I was just doing my job." "You keep saying that." "I keep disagreeing." Kelthris paused, choosing words carefully. "The Confederacy Council has authorized a formal delegation to visit Earth and establish medical collaboration agreements. They have requested that I lead this delegation. They have also requested that you serve as human liaison." Sarah blinked. "I'm a doctor, not a diplomat. You're someone who sees beyond species differences to recognize shared needs, who risks herself to help others, who builds bridges through competence and compassion." Kelthris smiled, a very alien expression that Sarah had learned to recognize as genuine. "You are exactly what this delegation needs." "When would this happen?" "In 2 months, after the initial treaty documents are formalized. The trip would last approximately 6 weeks, visiting human medical institutions and research facilities. You would receive full diplomatic status and compensation." Sarah thought about her life on the station, her comfortable routine, her familiar patients. Then she thought about the possibilities. Introducing human and draconian medical professionals, facilitating research that could save countless lives across multiple species, building the kind of cooperation that could reshape galactic politics. "I'll need to arrange coverage for my medical duties here," Sarah said finally. Kelthris's scales brightened with pleasure. "I anticipated that response. Station administration has already approved a temporary leave, and Dr. Martinez has agreed to assume your caseload." "You were pretty confident in my answer." "I was confident in the person who held fire in her hands without hesitation." Kelthris extended one clawed hand in the human gesture of greeting Sarah had taught during recovery. "Partners in building a better galaxy." Sarah took that hand carefully, mindful of the heat, remembering the terror and triumph of surgery performed against impossible odds. "Partners." 3 months later, news networks across the galaxy broadcast images from Earth. Ambassador Kelthris and Dr. Sarah Chun signing formal medical collaboration agreements, while human and draconian physicians stood together, sharing knowledge that would revolutionize treatment across species. In the background of those broadcasts, if you looked carefully, you could see merchant Quilix among the crowd, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The Rothani had bet on cooperation over chaos, on building rather than destroying. Business was, after all, about recognizing profitable long-term investments. And in a quiet medical bay on a distant station, new patients arrived seeking treatment from physicians trained in techniques developed by a human doctor who once held fire in her hands to save a dragon's life. The galaxy continued turning, changed in small but significant ways by those willing to choose compassion over fear, cooperation over isolation, hope over despair. All because one person had been asked if they could do the impossible and had simply replied, "Let me try."